Let's just have a moment of silence for my soul. You ever spend so much time watching art tutorials that you forget your actual style and try to copy what all these other artists did, but then it comes out as a jumbled mess because you watch too many videos from too many people? Welcome to my life. Today, as I'm sure you read from the title, we're gonna look at the work of Alicja Nai. Yes, I spent a lot of time watching her videos, slowing them down and trying to figure out how to say Alicia, and yeah, for the longest time I did say Alicia. That's what I get for putting out bad karma regarding people saying my name wrong. And if you've ever watched Alicja paint, you know that she uses Procreate on an iPad, so today's video is gonna be a bit of a double challenge because we're gonna see if her technique applies to A, my style, and B, Photoshop. And just because we enjoy a good challenge on this channel, today I'm gonna try and DIY some of her Procreate brushes in Photoshop. Yeah, please send prayers. I just quickly want to say this video is not a replacement for any of Alicya's videos. Her videos are so amazing and there is loads to learn from it. I have linked her channel and the video that I took this video from in the video description, so make sure you check that out. And this is also not a style study because instead of looking at the end product and trying to replicate that, we are actually looking at her techniques and the steps that she follows and seeing if that applies to my style. In essence, this is just one of those I tried following an Alicja Nai video tutorial type beat. As always, if you enjoyed this video and find it helpful, then please do remember to give it a big thumbs up and leave a comment below. Hit that subscribe button because there's loads more where this came from. And if you'd like to see even more content every single week, come check out my Instagram, the link is in the video description. And if you want to grab exclusive content, come check out my Patreon, the link is also in the description. Alright, let's look at another Technique Tryout featuring Alicja Nai. Listen, I tried to see if I could convert Procreate brushes to Photoshop, and apparently you can't, at least with the more up-to-date brushes, and even then you would have to customize them a lot to get them working, even vaguely as well. And I was like, if I'm gonna put in that much time anyway, I might as well just DIY them from scratch. Now, obviously, I'm not gonna recreate all of her brushes because that's just wrong. She's probably spent ages curating her brush sets and they look amazing and very intricate. Today, I'm just gonna try and recreate a couple of the basic ones that I see a lot of Procreate artists use, and that's gonna be fair, right? Please don't sue me, Alicja, my ad revenue is not enough to hire a lawyer. And for the rest, I'm just gonna use some of my tried and tested brushes, mostly my magic brush, which is now gonna be permanently linked in the video description. Alright, so today I'm gonna try and DIY 4 separate brushes. Well, 5, but the last 2 are the same brush with a slight variation. We're gonna create a sketch/line art brush, a flat color brush, a soft blender, and a common brush for specular highlights and eyelashes. Let's start with the sketch brush. It looks like a simple hard-edged round alpha with a tiny bit of texture to it, but there is more to the alpha than just that. When you're creating a brush, always remember you want to work on a white background and create a new layer for the alpha, which you would paint in black, kind of like you would paint a layer mask. Technically, it doesn't matter if you paint on a new layer or directly into the white layer. The brush engine will only pick up the black areas as your brush alpha. But I prefer to work on a new layer because it's non-destructive. Like I said, the sketch brush has a bit of a texture, so the way we're gonna add it is through a layer mask, again, non-destructive. I found a simple grainy texture and pasted it into the layer mask, but that was just not working. So I ended up having to add a random bunch of scribbles to the alpha, including literal cuts across the entire circle, just so that when the brush put down a line, it still had that texture. This would be a challenge if we work directly into the background layer, so when in doubt, always make a new layer. I'm gonna go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and we'll call this one Pencil Base. In the preset window, I want to mess around with the dynamics of the brush. While watching Alicia's sketch, I noticed that her pencil brush had a bit of pressure opacity and pressure size variation. So I'm gonna turn those on for this brush and put a pretty high minimum value on it. So it's not crazy variable, but it's not completely static either. I also like to mess around with the spacing and other brush properties until it looks right. Once I'm happy with this, I'm gonna save this as a new preset and call it Pencil AN. I'm gonna go back to the pencil base brush and fiddle with it a little more just to create the line art brush. For the most part, it is the same as the pencil brush, except with a slightly smaller pressure opacity curve, but a steeper pressure size curve, meaning that there is a wider range of size that responds to pressure, but it's always more opaque than the pencil brush. I'm gonna save this as Ink AN. Let's create a flat color brush. I'm gonna start with a basic hard edge circle alpha. What I noticed here was that the top and bottom edges of these brushes were hard, but the right and left edges were soft. So I'm gonna airbrush the two sides out a little and soften them, but leave the top and bottom as is. As you can see, I did have to do a couple of test alphas before getting the right shape. I'm gonna save this as flat base. When it comes to the dynamics, there is no pressure sensitivity, so I'm gonna leave those two alone. However, the brush seems to have an angle jitter in that the soft edges always follow the angle the brush takes. So I'm gonna create an angle jitter and link it to pen direction. I can then save this preset as flat AN. Alrighty, brush number 3, the soft blender. This one was a little tricky because while the alpha is pretty basic, the mechanics are where things get a little strange. I'm gonna create a simple round alpha and blur it quite a lot so the edges are super diffused, almost like an airbrush. We're gonna save this alpha as smudge base. I then went to the smudge tool, selected this alpha, and started playing with the brush dynamics. Honestly, I just messed about in there until I got the kind of effect I wanted. This will probably depend on how hard you tend to press down on your stylus, how big your paintings usually are, and so on. I found that the biggest changes in blendability came from altering the scatter of the brush, so make sure your blender smudge brushes always have at least a tiny bit of scatter. One thing I did specifically do, however, is make sure that the noise checkbox is selected. This creates a bit of noise just at the edges, which gives you that tiny bit of texture even though you're blending. When I'm happy with this, I'm gonna save this preset as Blend AN and make sure to save the tool setting as well. That way it'll always pop into the smudge tool when you use this preset. And finally, let's make that gloss/eyelash brush. This took a bit of head scratching, but as far as I can tell, this isn't a single round alpha, but looks like two separate circles. I'm gonna create one circle, lower the size, and duplicate it. I blurred out the smaller circle because having that smudgier tiny circle gives you that nice depth when you paint with the brush. I'm gonna save this as gloss base. For the gloss brush, I want to create some basic dynamics. We're gonna first map the angle to initial direction. That way we're getting these two lines with a bit of gap in between them, but when we paint a circle, it doesn't just make two concentric circles. And with transfer, I want the opacity and flow to be mapped to pen pressure. That way, the harder you press, the more opaque the color. I'm gonna save this preset as Gloss AN. With the gloss preset selected, there's only one little change that will make this into an eyelash brush, and that is adding some size variation. I'm gonna set the size to pen pressure as well and save this as a separate preset, call it Lashes AN. Alright, that's all the custom brushes. I can now go ahead and delete all the brushes with the word base in their names, and I'm gonna go ahead and save this entire set as an ABR file. I also imported my usual brushes because, like I said, we're not gonna sit down and DIY every single brush. With that in place, we are now ready to paint. Alita likes to start with a magenta pencil sketch. I noticed that one of the first things she does is create a quick gesture and then build a body around said gesture. Also, the pencil sketch is eventually gotten rid of, so don't worry about what color you choose for it, but for this purpose, I'm going to create a magenta sketch. Today, I want to work on kind of a cosmic horror theme, so I'm going to create a very unnatural, very abrupt gesture with some sharp angles. And once I'm happy with that, I can then go in and build anatomy around it. With the head, I'm going to try and follow an exact guide of how she maps out the face. So we're going to start with a circle and then create almost like a coat of arms shield shape for the face. She then splits the face in the middle vertically and pulls the bottom edge of the circle out into a line across the face horizontally. She then splits each vertical half with another vertical line that indicates where the corner of the mouth ends and the inner eye begins. She then lowers the opacity and creates a new layer on top and starts to put in some lines. Now listen, Procreate seems to have an option that creates smooth straight lines, or so I want to believe, because if she's able to create smooth straight lines like that by hand, I'm gonna have a crisis. However, I personally don't preserve line art for my final painting, so I'm just gonna wing this step, mostly because turning on lazy brush drives me nuts. So here's the sketch that we're gonna work on. Alright, this part is super easy. We're going to create a new layer underneath the line art and paint in some flat colors. Now you guys know that I like to use the pen tool, create a custom selection around the silhouette, and then fill it in with the paint bucket tool. However, it seems to me that Alicja paints the flats by hand. I'm not super sure if she does them in stacked layers, in that the skin is one layer, the eyes are another, the hair is a third layer, and so on. But when in doubt, always create a new layer. And that, children, is what we refer to as a callback. But yeah, I'm gonna do separate layers for all the materials just because it makes life a lot easier when you're trying to paint inside the lines. In some areas where she wants a bit of diffuse color, Alicja uses a lasso selection and paints into it with a soft airbrush. This is actually a technique that I've seen a lot of artists use, and it works really nicely because the lassoed edge is hard and sharp, but you paint the other edge to be soft thanks to the airbrush. So you get that blending, but you're still preserving hard edges. This is especially amazing when you're painting lights or shadows in the face, where you want enough structure to show the plane shifts, but you still want everything to be soft and blended for smooth skin. When it comes to ambient occlusion shadows, however, she generally paints them in as hard, flat colors to begin with, so that's what I'm gonna do with the edges of the character's face, hair, and clothing. Here's what the piece looks like with the flats painted in. Alright, this is where we get to play around with that blender brush. I don't generally use the smudge tool in my paintings, at least when it comes to blending. So when I saw Alicja use the blender brush to blend out the edges of that ambient occlusion, it looked so good that I had to try it out. So we're gonna use that blend brush we made and softly blend out some of those flat ambient shadows that we created just now. However, you want to make sure that you're not over blending, because then you're just gonna lose all form and it'll all just look muddy and gooey, not a good look on anyone. Based on her videos, it seems like she only blends about 50% of the edges, of which only a tiny fraction are truly blended completely. For the most part, she keeps the blending right at the edge without pulling the lighter tone too far into the shadow. This is super important, you guys, because it allows her to really preserve that contrast without having full-on wrinkles in the face. She also adds in some color variation with a grainy airbrush tool, so I'm just grabbing a regular airbrush and adding some noise to it just so that the edges aren't super soft. That way we can have that smooth blend, but it also has a bit of a grit to it. So after all the blending and shading, here's what we have. Okay, so now that we have all the main shapes and colors and values and form down, we can go ahead and add the little details, which is mainly the specular highlights, lashes, and all that stuff that we don't want to paint over. And for this, I'm gonna create a separate layer because I don't trust myself to not go back and accidentally paint over it because my brain doesn't know when to stop. Hi, I'm Srish and I have the Jenna Marbles brand of the 2 Mud Gene and do not get moderation. But yeah, the way Alicja does the specular highlights is by grabbing that gloss brush and a bright white and creating tiny shapes. She rarely ever paints just smudges of highlight on the wet surfaces. It's generally like a tiny oval or a rounded rectangle. So I'm gonna create these tiny highlights on all the surfaces that will be wet, like the eye and the lips. With the skin, however, she only does little smudges because the skin is likely not as reflective, so it mostly reflects back complex light shapes as just simple specks of light. So for the cheeks, the nose, and any other skin highlight, we're still gonna use the same brush, but we're gonna try and make like a solid smudge shape rather than ovals and that. Coming back to the eyes, I noticed that she did this one thing and it really makes the eyes pop. She grabs the iris color and on a new layer paints over the entire iris with that flat brush. She then sets the layer to color dodge and messes around with the opacity. This causes that eye color to just really brighten and saturate, and like I just said, it makes the eyes pop. I'm then going to switch to the eyelash brush and grab a black and start to flick out some of the eyelashes. Like I said earlier, the reason we want the pressure size to be turned on for this brush is so that when we flick out the eyelashes, they kind of taper off into a point the way eyelashes generally do. And because there are 2 little shapes in that alpha and not just one, it's going to give us that fluffy eyelash look and double the lashes as compared to painting every single eyelash by hand. I'm also going to use this brush to add a bit of texture to the eyebrows, and honestly, I think this brush is definitely gonna come live in my permanent collection. See, this is why I love this series, you guys, because while style study helps me understand all the logic behind those beautiful paintings, this one is so much more practical in that you're kind of learning new technical painting skills. As with last week, you can watch me paint the entirety of this painting on Patreon, so check that link out in my video description. There's loads of exclusive rewards on there already. I've literally been posting 4 to 5 days a week every single week since like January, so if you're not a patron yet, you're definitely missing out on like 8 months of content. But yeah, here's the finished painting, and it honestly turned out so much more polished than my paintings usually do. Damn, I don't think there has been a single technique tryout where I haven't learned a million things. I am so glad you guys chose this from the poll because this feels like a level up kind of month. Massive thank you to Alicja Nai for sharing her art and her incredible content here on YouTube. You guys, I know I probably don't have to say this, but if you haven't watched her yet, please go watch her content. I promise you, you'll come back from it a much better artist. And if you do use Procreate, she does have her brush packs up on her website, so make sure you check that out. They are really good from what I can see. If you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful, then please do let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and leave a comment below. Hit that subscribe button because the rest of this month is going to be on a very similar vein. And if you'd like to see any artists on this series, also leave those in the comment below. And I can't believe I hadn't done this already, but if you want to watch even more technique tryout videos, I now have them in a playlist which I will leave up here in the outro somewhere. You can totally go watch them, binge them, feel free. But yeah, I can't believe I didn't have a playlist quite yet, but we do now. But with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more videos and the playlist up here, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!